TopMedTalk.
Well, hello and welcome to TopMedTalk. TopMedTalk is at ANZCA this year, the annual scientific meeting of the Australian-New Zealand College of Anaesthetists and Faculty of Pain Medicine. It's in Sydney, Australia. I'm Desiree Chappell, and I'm joined by my co-host, Monty Mythen. Hello, Monty.
Hey, Desiree. It's good to be here in Sydney.
I'm sure that it is good for you to be in Sydney, but for those who can't see us, which is our podcast listeners right now, I'm actually joining virtual, which I'm a little bit jealous you get to be there with all of our friends.
So where are you, Desiree, and what time is it?
I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, my hometown, and it's 10 p.m. I've just put the boys to bed. But the beauty of and silver lining of COVID is that we got really used to doing this virtual thing, and you being in person and me being stuck in Kentucky. So it's not new for us, right?
There's a big screen up here that we can all look at, behind our guests, which has a splendid Desiree Chappell on it, beaming out across the Trade Exhibition Centre at the moment. So welcome.
So I'm there. Yes, thank you very much. Well, we're so glad that we can make this happen, Monty. We have a phenomenal booth. You've been sending me pictures. We'll be posting them on social media and with all of our pods. But 3M and ANZCA really were able to come together and support TopMedTalk to be there in the exhibit hall with a gorgeous booth. And we just wanted to send a huge thanks out to them for supporting us and being able to transmit and join and transmit from around the globe, literally.
Yeah, and we got Nick Majerison's been working hard. We've got the first podcast up already, so it's out there already. So hundreds of people have joined in, thousands soon, I hope, to listen to what's happening here. Yeah,
the second one's going out soon. Nick has actually been burning the midnight oil. This is really reminiscent of the Pockapalooza, Monty, whenever we did round the globe in 24 hours.
Yeah, never again.
Kind of doing it. Well, Monty, so far we've had a great conversation, many more to come. Lots of wonderful topics here at ANZCA this year, but this is one in particular that I'm super excited about having on diversity and gender bias in research. And this is something we've talked about here on TopMedTalk over the years, women in medicine, women in research, and diversity and inclusion. And so this next conversation is with a friend of ours on TopMedTalk, a previous guest, Kate Leslie. Kate, it is so lovely to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a great pleasure, Desiree.
Yeah, so we were just reminiscing. We think that when we talked to you the last, it was in Orlando at the ASA Anesthesiology 2019, right before COVID happened.
Yeah, that was a great occasion because we were launching our balanced anaesthesia trial, which was then published in the Lancet. And it was a big thrill for me and the principal investigator, Tim Short from New Zealand.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kate, you have done a ton of research and been in part of the ANZCA Clinical Trials Network, a founding member of that, and been involved there in Australia and internationally. Tell us a little bit more about some of the work that you've been doing recently.
So I've continued my interest with multi-centre trials along with my colleagues in the ANZCA CTN, and most thrillingly, we have just received $3 million to do a multi-centre trial on sugammadex, neostigmine and post-operative pulmonary complications. So that's very exciting. That's got an embedded health economic analysis. And I'll be running that with colleagues from the University of Melbourne and the ANZCA CTN. So that's a big thrill. But at this conference, it's great. I mean, it's a testament to persistence, endurance, and resilience, which many of my clinical trial colleagues around the world will recognise are essential characteristics if you ever want to complete a large multi-centre trial.
Absolutely.
So you forget about all the inspiration and vision that you might once have had as you get ground down by the system. But anyway, on a more positive note, at this meeting, I'm talking about some research that we did about the participation of women in clinical trials. And this really came off a symposium that the British Journal of Anaesthesia ran in Prato, Italy, a few years ago, where they got together a whole host of women from around the world to talk about the involvement of women as researchers, but also the involvement of women as patients. And at that time, we recognised, I think we knew it all along, that there was room for improvement in both of those things, and it sort of coincides with the whole Me Too kind of movement as well. So Jessica Kaiser, who's a biostatistician in Melbourne, and we looked at ANZCA clinical trial network trials, and we did an analysis about the participation of women. And what we showed was that none of our trials included more than 50% women, and then on average it was about 35 or 40% of the participants were women. And we also showed that women were at lower risk than men. The women who were recruited to the trials were at lower risk. But interestingly, they had the same outcomes. So they were just as likely to die, have myocardial infarction, stroke, or surgical site infection. So it made us wonder about whether there are the reasons for that, whether women have some hidden risk factors that we're not measuring, and that they're actually at higher risk than they appear to be, or whether they're receiving different care from men, whether they are actually having more of the outcomes, or whether men are getting more of the investigations that lead to the diagnosis of the outcomes. So it was really interesting, actually, to reveal that information from all of those trials that we've done. So in our new study about Sugamidex, we're embedding a study about the inclusion of women as participants in the study. So we're going to, for the first time for our group, record the sex and probably the language spoken at home of patients who we approach for inclusion in the trial, so that we can compare the sex and gender and the language spoken at home between those who consent and those who don't. Because women are less inclined to take risks than men. That's why they have fewer injuries, why they have less problematic drug and alcohol issues, and why they are less likely to consent to be part of what might be seen as a dangerous experiment.
So Kate, if I'm just step in for a second, Desiree, when it comes to the randomisation process then, are you going to make some corrective actions to limit the number of men who are randomised, or are you going to just have a subset analysis that corrects after that point?
We are going to do a post-hoc subgroup analysis of the intervention by sex, because the particular inclusion criteria for this trial will probably result in about 40% of women, which is enough. But there's a whole literature out there about what you should do with respect to men and women in trials. If the condition mainly affects men, should we have more men? Or should men and women be able to equally benefit and equally take the burden of being in a trial? Then you should have half and half. Or if there are more risk factors in one or the other, there are different ways of doing it. And we're only at the beginning of trying to work out what the best approach is.
Because the results, jumping ahead, I'm just sitting here now reflecting on the importance of all of this, is when we do gender agnostic trials, we do them on men and women, irrespective of how many people sign up to do the trial, we apply the results in a gender agnostic way. Is that right? So we sort of say,
in general,
yeah, this was tested in an imbalanced way, is I think what I'm hearing, but we apply it assuming that it was balanced.
Yes, but what we don't know, we actually don't know that.
No.
It may be possible that if we had a complex, expensive intervention, that clinicians down the track would preferentially offer that intervention to men. If there happened to be a bias against women out there, or vice versa. So there's all of that sort of post-implementation research stuff that is an open field for some vigorous young investigator to, like Claire, to have a look at.
Women, I know. Well, that's a perfect segue to introduce our next guest. We have Claire Stewart. Claire, thank you so much for joining us today. For all of us here on TopMedTalk, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your interests and what you're involved in there at ANZCA.
Thank you so much, Desiree and Monty. So my name's Claire Stewart, and I'm an anaesthetist who's also the chair of the Gender Equity Subcommittee in ANZCA. We're really lucky that our college has a subcommittee reporting straight to professional affairs and executive who think that gender equity is important. As part of that role, we ran a survey last year of our anaesthetic members, so now talking about research involving our colleagues. And so we sent out to 1,225 fellows, so consultant anaesthetists, and we got 455 analysable responses, which is pretty good for survey data. Interestingly, despite sending it to 50-50 men and women, being a gender equity survey, we actually got a skewed population of more women back. They were equal in every other respect. So age, decade, qualified region, where you worked, that was all the same. But obviously more women wanted to talk about gender equity in the anaesthesia workplace. With respect to research opportunities, so even though there were no differences in the overall hours of non-clinical duty and unpaid hours, and certainly no difference in people thinking they had access to teaching, research and clinical support, there was a big difference in some answers, and really importantly, I suppose, relationship status didn't affect whether people were involved with research. But in answer to the question, to what extent do you feel having children or dependents has adversely affected your career involvement in research, there were 27% of men who agreed or strongly agreed, and 57% of female respondents agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. So that does have a significance, a p-value of less than 0.001. And it's hard to know all of the factors that tie into that, but in particular of interest, men and women equally answered that they prioritise work-life balance over career opportunities. So I think that represents that as an overall population, anaesthetists, both men and women, are trying to be involved in things outside of work. But for some reason, for women, once you add family, it seems to affect their ability to engage with research.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
As a mom of two boys that I just put to bed, kind of juggling everything, it is hard. It's fascinating and really interesting the survey that you did. I'd be interested too. Was there any disparity between like ages within the population or the cohort that responded, or sometimes I feel like in Kate, I don't know if you remember, but one of the conversations that we had when we talked to the group of women that were in Prado, we talked a little bit about, there are a lot of people who have been in this space for a while that felt actually there were a lot of opportunities for them as women, but some of the younger women were feeling like, because they were a woman, because they had younger families, that it was a little bit more difficult for them. So did you, Claire, did you see any disparity there in age at all?
Yeah, we actually didn't do any subgroup analyses on that. I think just the numbers, once we broke down to gender and by age group, we haven't looked at that, although you raise an excellent point in terms of going back. But we did note that having had more women respond, we then had a lot more younger women had responded. So what we're now doing, that's all from our quantitative research. There's actually a qualitative paper coming out. So there were 8 sections in our survey where people could just write free text. We left that largely actually as a cathartic exercise for people, because we knew that we were going to ask some pretty inflammatory and emotional questions, and we thought it was important for people to be able to. And I think qualitative data and research is a real emerging field, and so we're now doing a qualitative analysis of those comments, and hopefully things like what you've mentioned in terms of age or seniority affecting answers will hopefully come out in that paper.
Yeah, that's very cool. Hey, what did you make of whenever you heard these survey results? I mean, as a woman who's been involved in research much of your career, I'm sure you have opinions on this as well.
Me? Opinions?
Maybe just a few.
I have been, the only woman or one of, 2 or 3 women involved in anaesthesia research in Australia for decades. There were some very important female predecessors of mine in Australia and around the world. But it's great to see the college institute this gender equity work and really put their money where their mouth is, I guess. For example, at this meeting, the organisers embraced the directive from the college to try for gender balance in all of their panels and right from the top of the program to the bottom. And in fact, that's been the case at ANZCA meetings since a meeting in Brisbane about 10 years ago. So, in so many different areas, ANZCA is trying to achieve not only gender equity, but also ethnic diversity, with respect to our Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander peoples in Australia and Maori and Pacifica people in New Zealand and beyond. So it's exciting and it makes everything a lot more interesting, I think.
Absolutely. Women always add a little flair. No, I'm kidding.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, Claire, talk to us a little bit more. Kate was just mentioning, and I think you had mentioned too, about some of the work that ANZCA's done there at the meeting. But as far as, for the college and what they offer for, burgeoning women who and people of color who are interested in really getting more into research, what are some of the support systems and things that you guys are doing from your committee and that point of view to support that effort?
So one thing that the committee's been really forward about is trying to address unconscious bias. So encouraging interview panels around Australia to really look at how they're selecting people. And I suppose that will flow on to research as well in terms of promoting people being really engaged with what their biases are when they're interviewing people so that we can get more diversity inclusion in general. And then, of course, they're very supportive of people like Kate Leslie, and we're very lucky to have women really high up. We've had multiple female college presidents over the last decades. And so they're really actively promoting women in leadership, knowing that you can't be what you can't see. And so I think the college has done a really great job in promoting those kind of people and encouraging them to mentor women coming up under them.
Yeah, it is real. It's cool that we were having this conversation. I do feel that, the different interviews that I've been doing and meeting, you guys from Australia, it feels like you really do. You're kind of walking the walk, not just talking the talk there. Even though Kate has maybe been one of very few for a long time, it sounds like that is a priority for your organization. And that has been thematically what we've been hearing for several years. Monty, I wanted to, bring the man into the conversation.
Is that me?
And get kind of, we've had lots of conversation about diversity in research and in anesthesia and medicine in general. So any thoughts about what you've kind of been hearing and what Claire heard in her survey there?
Yeah, well, I think that, certainly in the United Kingdom, we've talked about it before, the Athena Swan initiative, which was very much this sort of badging of how you're actually walking the walk rather than talking the talk, which and people can look it up online, which led on to inability to get certain grants or getting a certain level of approval for an organisation. I don't know, Kate or Claire, if you've had experience of it, and if you think going there helps at all.
Well, it's got to be a national or international approach from the top down. It's very hard for people to change things at an individual level. It was reminding me about publishing, and the British Journal of Anaesthesia, of which I'm an editor, is one of in the Elsevier stable, along with the Lancet and other publications. And they're right at the top of that organisation. They are mandating the gathering information about sex, gender and ethnicity, and they are monitoring statistics about editors-in-chief, editors and reviewers, and the number of authors in each category. And it's, pretty soon we'll get feedback about the proportion of reviewers that we're trying to, get who are men and women and all sorts of different data. And I think Claire was talking about how important setting data benchmarks are so that you can try and improve against those. We don't have anything like a Athena Swan in Australia, but university to university there are programs like that.
And I feel, Desiree, as though we've made pretty good inroads from the gender perspective. It's not as clear to me that we've done as well from the ethnicity perspective. I think that's fair.
I don't think I can really comment because we don't have enough data.
Yeah, okay.
And it's a sensitive, issue.
Yes.
The same thing applies to transgender status. We did another study where we looked at publications, and there were 35 million participants, in this literature review that we did, and none of them were transgender. Mm-hmm. That could not possibly be the case. So, it's all about getting the right sort of information.
And interestingly, in our survey, we did send it out to people listed as non-binary, so fellows who are recognised as non-binary, and every single one who received an invite went on to complete the full survey. We couldn't include them in our analysis. There were worries about them being re-identifiable because the numbers were so low. And then 12 people who fully responded to the survey but still preferred not to report their gender. So I think part of diversity and inclusion is also going to be a redefinition of gender and how people want to be reported in studies.
Identified, yeah. And it's so interesting when you think about it from a practitioner level, like when we're doing our internal, surveys and studies and things like that versus patients. I recently have been taking care of, not a lot, but more transgender patients than I ever have before. And that it comes with a whole nother, area of learning and sensitivities and figuring out how to take care of patients that do identify in different ways. And I think it's really important that we highlight that in our field and really figure out how to go forward to make it good for all and include everyone. So it's great work that you guys are doing. Claire, tell us a little bit more. I know I said I saw some YouTube videos that you had done for ANZCA on International Women's Day. It sounds like you've been really active and really out there promoting the work of the committee. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we're really lucky to have a really active committee and to be getting really great responses from ANZCA. So like I mentioned, the unconscious bias toolkit that's been rolled out and will go out to examiners hopefully as well in the future. We also have a really open line of communication. So at the moment we're working on equity in response to our international medical graduates who are coming through and people in regional and remote Australia. That's going to be our big area of focus, is trying to see whether there are equity issues that those fellows are currently going through that we can help with. We've also are following up the survey results, so we will continue to aim to distribute this to anaesthetic workplaces and encourage them to take the results further in things like interview panels, mentorship, making leadership opportunities equally available in departments nationwide. Yeah, that's great. Well, in closing, I mean, you've mentioned this several times and we've talked about it before, but unconscious bias, I think, as we're sitting here talking, it's like, I think a lot of people don't really think that they have biases towards women or people of color or people not like them, whatever it may be. Yeah. And I think that's, really important that you guys are leaning into that. I mean, where do you guys think you're going to be going in the future with that work? I mean, I think one thing is getting people to identify that it can still be a meritocracy while you acknowledge that there is inequity in a system. So what we're saying is that if you apply gender equity to a system, for instance, if we're talking about how we hire our anaesthesia trainees, you don't affect the merit of who you select just because you recognise that you may have inequity in your existing system. And I think that's a really hard concept to get across to people for whom the system's currently working and comfortable. But I think we know in society in general, and now we have some data in a survey, that there are a lot of men out there who don't perceive a problem, and there are women out there who do perceive a problem. Now, whether the problem exists or not is a truth that you haven't measured in survey data, but that you can measure if you start educating people about unconscious bias and asking them to really reevaluate how they hire trainees, and then seeing whether that affects some kind of change. And I think one of the difficulties with gender equity is taking people who might feel threatened by changes in the system and making them understand they're not losing anything. You don't have to have anything taken away from you in order to achieve an equitable system. You just need to be willing to recognise that how you've previously potentially measured merit may not be giving you the outcomes that you're expecting. You may not be getting the most meritocratic person just because you're used to talking to a white man of your age group and therefore he feels more meritocratic, and then saying, well, actually, let's look at some CVs. Oh, look, all of their CVs are actually equal. So let's think about other ways that we can help select our trainees. I don't know about you guys, but in Australia, the standard of people applying to anaesthesia training and who apply for then consultant jobs is incredibly high. And how you select them is getting more and more challenging. A lot of them have PhDs and research and that kind of thing. And finding a way to make sure that that's an equitable system will be really important for our workplace culture going forward.
Absolutely. Kate, I see you smiling, and I know that this is something that, you've probably been working on. As someone who has been in this space, what advice would you give to women or those who feel that they, maybe haven't had a voice in this space and they want to be involved? Like, what is the biggest piece of advice that you can give?
Oh, well, connect with the sisterhood. It's got strong leadership in people like Claire. And it's a highly connected and supportive group of people, and in fact there are a bunch of blokes in the sisterhood as well. Yeah. So get support and get started, and while you're at it, change society so that men take equal roles, not just supporting roles in the care of children and older people, and then everything will be okay.
Yeah. So, Claire, Kate, maybe, are there tools out there that we can use to more effectively flush out our unconscious biases? Are there websites I can go to? Are there questionnaires I can take to say, actually, I need to face up to my unconscious biases?
Yeah, there absolutely are. I mean, you can literally Google, what are my unconscious biases? There are a lot of tools out there. ANZCA has actually developed a toolkit. So if you go to the ANZCA Gender Equity website, you can use our toolkit. It's really effective. It's really interesting. I am obviously biased towards, I think women are like great communicators and that kind of thing. So I have my own biases that I'm happy to lay on the table and be aware of. But yeah, I really encourage everybody. We also have a thing on the website where you can measure your department's current stance on gender equity for anybody who wants to have a look at where they may fall in the spectrum of departments across Australia.
And is that accessible to all of us, or is that just for your college members? Or
No, that's available on the public college website, the toolkit included.
And where do we find it? What's the website again?
It's anzca.edu.au, and if you search for the gender equity page, all the links are there.
Thank you.
I'm really interested in this because having done a lot of unconscious bias website things, I'm now conscious of all my biases, or not all of them, but some of them, and they pop up uncomfortably all the time. And the next piece of work is to work out how to deal with that. And, what approaches you should take to not beating yourself up about it or overcompensating. So I'll interview Claire now. Claire, is the college doing anything to help us once we recognise what our biases are to deal with them?
Yeah, I think one of the main things is trying to actually put together an interview panel who have a fair distribution of their biases is probably a big one. And so that involves your panel having the insight to say, listen, I'm sorry, there are currently 4 men on the team. Maybe you don't need 1 more man on your interview panel. And at the moment, that is often actually like a self-proposed insight. And so there are some guidelines there to encourage people to not only get your people who will be on a panel to do the unconscious bias, use the toolkit, but then also to come forward and say, well, let's try and put together the most unbiased panel that we can of our department.
Well, and I think it's like learning the soft skills of being the one who says, I'm sorry, time out. This is a manel, as they call it, for, all men panel. And that's what I think is really hard. And when you're learning, to Kate's point too, it's like when you're learning to deal with your own unconscious bias and that of others and finding the soft skills to deal with that. So, all wonderful work. Ladies, thank you both for joining us today. It's been a wonderful conversation. And thank you all for listening. We want to be sure to give a shout out to 3M and ANZCA for having TopMedTalk there in the exhibit hall and getting Monty to the meeting. Monty, I'm sure you're going to have a great time over the next 3 days doing the interviews.
And at the gala dinner, Desiree.
Yeah, the gala dinner. They'll be missing you, Desiree. Now, Desiree, you're going to see Kate before too long. Where are you going to see Kate? Kate Leslie? Claire's very welcome as well, but Kate, we think, is coming to a place that you will be at soon.
She's going to be in Dingle with us at the EBCOM Dingle meeting there in Ireland. And Kate, I think we have lots of wonderful meeting events and things that, the conference there, but I think there's a lot of other fun things to do in Dingle too.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't wait to see you. Well, again, thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to Edwards Life Sciences, G Healthcare, and Medtronic for all that you do to make TopMedTalk work, free and open access to the world. And, you can find us at TopMedTalk.com. You can find us on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. We are there. We're going to be active this whole weekend. If you like what you heard and want to hear more from Kate Leslie or any of our other guests, please do check out TopMedTalk. You can look up in our search function all of those other pods and hear some more great content. Again, ladies, cheers to everything that you're doing and the wonderful work that you are to promote women and diversity and inclusion within our space of perioperative medicine. So cheers to you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Desiree.
TopMedTalk. Thanks for downloading TopMedTalk. Don't forget to subscribe via your podcatcher. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And also, don't forget, TopMedTalk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. If you check out ebpom.org, you can find low prices on some of the conferences we're organising around the world. Many of them are virtual and don't even involve you leaving your own home. Check out ebpom.org now.